In this video, we will cover the steps and process for setting up your new Zūm Rails API. The Zūm Rails API will allow you to build a payment flow into your existing architecture in a way that you will have complete control over adding users, both for payees and payors, and creating transactions. An API, or Application Programming Interface, is a set of rules and protocols that allows different software applications to communicate and interact with each other. It defines how requests and responses should be formatted and how data should be exchanged between applications. To integrate the Zūm Rails API into your application, you can follow these general steps. Please note that before getting started, our integration support team will reach out to schedule a kickoff meeting to go through your specific use cases and ensure you have all the necessary resources to ensure a successful integration. After completing your integrations kickoff meeting, the best place to start is reviewing the Zūm Rails API documentation, which can be found on our website, as well as in the onboarding guide that was sent to your primary account email at the time of setup. This documentation will help you understand the available endpoints, the required parameters, and the expected responses. This will give you a clear understanding of how to interact with our API. Next, set up the environment. Depending on the programming language or framework you are using, you may need to install any required dependencies or libraries to facilitate API integration. Make sure your development environment is properly set up. From there, ensure to download Postman. We offer a Postman collection to help simplify your integration process. It can be found under the API Specifications tab of our API documentation. Follow the outlined steps to complete the setup. The Zūm Rails API requires authentication, so you'll need to include the necessary credentials in your requests. This involves obtaining both API username and password combination from the Zūm portal. To get your API username and password, log into your Zūm portal and click on Webhook and API Settings. Under the section API Settings, copy the username and generate a password. Remember to save the password on your end because once you close this page, it will not be stored in the Zūm portal. Understanding the Authorize flow. Once you have your API username and password, you can get the API base URLs and specifics. To complete authorization, set the API base URL and method, then input your API username and password. The endpoint to authenticate is as displayed here and the method is post. Once you authorize successfully, you will receive an HTTP status code of 200 in the message, post request successful. You will also receive a bearer token, which will last up to an hour from the time it is generated, allowing multiple API calls to be made securely without authorizing each time. The Zūm Rails API uses the HTTP protocol for communication. Use a library or framework in your chosen programming language to make HTTP requests to the API's endpoints. These libraries often provide convenient methods for handling HTTP methods and adding headers or parameters to requests. After sending a request to the API, you will receive a response from the API or webhook. The response will include the requested data and the result of the operation. Parse the response using the appropriate methods provided by the HTTP library to extract the relevant information from the response body. The API will return errors in case of invalid requests or server-side issues. Implement appropriate error handling in your application to handle different HTTP status codes and error responses. This can include displaying error messages to users or retrying failed requests. During the integration, it's important to thoroughly test your API calls and verify that you are receiving the expected data and responses. You can use tools like Postman to test the API endpoints independently before integrating them into your application. Monitor and debug any issues that may arise at this time. Once you have successfully tested the API integration, incorporate the API calls into your application's codebase. You can encapsulate API calls in functions or classes to make them reusable and modular. Integrate the API responses into your application's logic and user interface as required. After integrating the API, monitor its performance and keep an eye on any updates or changes provided by Zūm Rails by subscribing to our status page, which can be found on our website. APIs can evolve over time, so make sure to update your integration accordingly and handle any deprecations or modifications. If you have any questions, you can reference our Knowledge Center for helpful articles and how-tos or reach out to our integration support team for more information.